$19. That's all that stood between Joshua Winslet and rock bottom. Just $19 in the bank for a young plumber trying to build a life in a new country. Then, in a blink, that $19 turned into $22 million. A Powerball win. The kind of thing we all dream about, right? A total life reset. But for Joshua, this dream twisted into a full-blown nightmare. A downhill spiral that didn't end in a mansion filled with joy, but in a lonely room, surrounded by broken hopes and the grim reality of a fortune that cost him everything. His story isn't just about money. It's about what happens when sudden wealth crashes into old wounds. A shocking truth about how a lifeline can drag you under. How did a $22 million jackpot lead to a solitary grave? The answers are a chilling look at the dark side of fortune. Before the millions, before the lottery win made headlines, there was Joshua Winslet, a young man whose life, right from the start, was an uphill battle. Born in Australia, Joshua came into the world with two rare conditions, Duane syndrome and Goldenhar syndrome. These weren't just medical terms, they were daily struggles. Duane syndrome messed with his eye muscles, limiting their movement, while Goldenhar syndrome caused facial differences and other physical issues, like heart problems and a single, horseshoe-shaped kidney. Childhood should be about fun and discovery, but for Joshua, it was often a nightmare of torment. School wasn't a place for learning and making friends. It was where he faced constant bullying. His physical differences, the visible signs of his syndromes, made him an easy target. He was isolated, made fun of, and felt like he just didn't belong. Those emotional scars from his early years ran deep, leaving him feeling like an outsider, maybe even desperate for acceptance, for a life where his conditions didn't define him. He had plastic surgery as a kid to try and correct some things, but it wasn't completely successful, so he still had to deal with a world that's quick to judge on looks. All this struggle got too much for him to handle in a normal school setting. Joshua left school early, in year 10, and decided to learn a trade, starting a plumbing apprenticeship. It was a skill, something real in a life that had often felt unreal and harsh. But his past, and maybe the hope for a completely fresh start, a place where he wasn't Joshua the boy with the syndromes, pushed him to make a big move. At 20, he packed up and moved from Australia to New Zealand. He wasn't just looking for work, he was looking for a new identity, a chance to reinvent himself away from all the painful memories. He kept up with his plumbing apprenticeship in Alexandra, a town in the South Island, working for a local company, McClellan's Plumbing and Heating. His old boss, Rory McClellan, later said he was a pleasant young guy with a bright future ahead of him, and also mentioned that kidney issues had caused him problems. Life in New Zealand wasn't glamorous. It was the life of a young tradesman, just trying to get by. Money was tight, to put it mildly. Right before his life flipped upside down, Joshua Winslet had a mere $19 in his bank account. $19. That wasn't just a low balance. It showed how much he was struggling, his ordinary, tough reality. He was living paycheck to paycheck, dealing with the same money worries as so many others, maybe even more so because of his ongoing health issues and the emotional baggage he carried. This stark picture of his life makes what happened next even more shocking, almost unbelievable, and in the end, so much more tragic. It was 2018. Joshua, just 22 years old, was living and working in Alexandra. With his bank account down to that unforgettable $19, he did what millions do every week. He took a chance, a shot of hope against crazy odds. He bought a Powerball Lotto ticket. Some say it was for a $100 million Powerball draw. What happened next was one of those moments that splits your life into a before and an after. His numbers came up. Against all odds, Joshua Winslet was the sole winner of a $22 million Powerball prize. $22 million. For a young guy who, just hours earlier, was staring at his last $19, the amount was mind-boggling, almost impossible to grasp. Friends he called to share the news couldn't believe it. One said, he sent a screenshot of his Lotto app, and we still almost didn't believe him. It was something that doesn't happen to someone like Josh, you know? Especially $22 million. The win was confirmed on a Thursday. His first reaction, according to his former boss Rory McClellan, was to say he'd be back at work on Monday. McClellan, being an experienced businessman, advised him against it. I said, "There's always a job here for you, but I could imagine you not wanting to come to work when it sinks in." McClellan was right. He never saw Joshua again after the win. This wasn't just a lottery win. For Joshua, it was supposed to be a new beginning. After a childhood filled with illness and bullying, after struggling to get on his feet, This huge sum of money must have felt like a gift from above, a chance to finally rewrite his story. The future, which once might have seemed worrying, now looked like it stretched out forever, sparkling with endless possibilities. He quit his plumbing job. Who wouldn't in his shoes? The immediate burden of money worries just vanished. At first, it looked like he was handling his new fortune responsibly. His parents stepped in to help manage the winnings, setting up a trust fund. This was a smart move, trying to put some structure and control around such a life-changing amount of cash. With the money, Joshua started buying assets. He bought properties in both Australia and New Zealand, including an upscale bed and breakfast and a winery near Alexandra, a property valued at $1.44 million. These investments suggested he was trying to build a secure future, to make the money work for him. The dream was in full swing. The young man who had so little now, at least on paper, had everything. Freedom from money troubles, the ability to make choices without worrying about cost, the chance to follow passions, help others, live comfortably and securely. It was all there for the taking. That $22 million was more than just cash. It was the key to a different life, one where the hardships of his past could fade into a distant memory. He was an instant multimillionaire, the main character in a fairy tale that seemed too good to be true. And for a while, maybe it felt that way. But the foundations of this new life, built on the sudden shock of enormous wealth, weren't as strong as they seemed. The same fortune that promised freedom also held the seeds of a future much darker than anyone, especially Joshua, could have ever imagined. That initial thrill of the win, the smart property buys, his parents helping manage things, these were the hopeful first steps in Joshua Winslet's new life. But the sheer weight of $22 million started to press down on him, subtly at first, then harder and harder, bending his dream off course. The young man who had longed for acceptance and a fresh start suddenly found himself the focus of a new kind of attention, one that was often fake and just looking to take advantage. Sudden wealth, especially for someone young and maybe emotionally scarred from past hurts, is like a giant magnet. It didn't take long for the wrong crowd to find their way to Joshua. These weren't real friends who cared about him. They were opportunists, people drawn in by the sparkle of his millions. Friends from his past noticed this change, saw new faces showing up, faces that seemed more interested in what Joshua could give them than who he was. The trust fund managed by his parents was meant to protect him, but it wasn't foolproof. Joshua could still get his hands on enough of his fortune to completely change his lifestyle. The quiet life of a plumber was gone, replaced by a life of leisure, but also more and more a life of overindulgence. Wanting to enjoy his wealth was natural, but for Joshua, it started showing up in ways that hinted at a worrying lack of direction. The judge at his later sentencing even said that because of the money, there was no motivation on your part to work or do anything other than enjoy yourself. This loss of purpose, of the daily routine that, even with its struggles, gives life structure and a sense of accomplishment, left a huge hole. His home, once a symbol of his incredible luck, started to change. Reports suggest his mansion in Newport, Adelaide, became a party house. This wasn't just about celebrating good fortune. It was about creating a place where lines blurred, where his generosity could be easily taken for granted. He bankrolled gatherings, becoming the host whose money kept a constant stream of parties going. But were these real connections, or just deals disguised as friendships? The court would later hear he was treated as a free ride by other drug users, a source of cash and a place to crash for their own habits. You can't underestimate the psychological hit of such a massive life change. Joshua had gone from being unknown and struggling to being a multimillionaire almost overnight. The attention, the sudden power to buy almost anything, the expectations, both real and imagined, could be totally overwhelming. For someone who'd been bullied and felt like an outsider, the sudden rush of friends, and being the center of a lively social scene, might have initially felt like the acceptance he'd always wanted. But this acceptance was built on a shaky foundation of money, not real connection. Ironically, the isolation might have started creeping in even as his house filled up with people. It's hard to find true friends when the main thing people see in you is your bank balance. Paranoia can kick in. Who's genuine? Who's here for me? And who's just here for my money? Friends later described his growing paranoia, something that often happens to people who suddenly get rich. The first property purchases were smart, but his spending probably became more random after that, more focused on the party lifestyle that was taking over. Managing such a huge amount of money takes immense discipline, especially when you're battling personal demons or don't have a strong sense of direction. Joshua, young and scarred by his past, might not have had the tools to handle these dangerous new waters. The cracks weren't just tiny anymore, they were becoming obvious breaks in the shiny surface of his dream life. The freedom his money promised was slowly turning into a gilded cage, where the bars were made of endless indulgence, shallow relationships, and a growing detachment from a meaningful life. The boy who wanted to escape his past was now running straight into a different kind of trap, one set by the very fortune that was supposed to save him. The shift from celebrated lottery winner to a man trapped by his own fortune sped up terrifyingly fast as Joshua Winslet dove into a world of drugs and excess. The wrong crowd he attracted wasn't just after his money for fancy toys or a good time. They wanted it to fuel their addictions, and in doing so, they fueled his. What might have started as just trying things out or a way to fit in with his new social circle quickly spiraled into what was called a hopeless drug addiction. His newfound wealth became the fuel for a destructive lifestyle. He wasn't just Joshua, the young man with a tough past, anymore. He became a provider, someone who made drug-fueled activities possible. Cocaine, MDMA, ecstasy, and cannabis became regular parts of his life. Friends and acquaintances, instead of throwing him a lifeline, took advantage of his generosity, using him as a way to get their own drugs. He regularly paid for gatherings where drugs were front and center. The court later heard how he was treated as a free ride by other drug users, a sad confirmation of how his fortune had twisted his relationships. His home in the Adelaide suburb of Newport, once a symbol of his incredible luck, turned into what was described as a drug den. Police photos released later painted a grim picture of this downfall. The house was littered with drugs and drug paraphernalia, empty beer bottles, nitrous oxide canisters, cannabis bongs, and lighters. A fridge, which once might have been stocked with a millionaire's delights, was photographed by police holding only alcohol, Red Bull, and a bowl of white powder, likely drugs. The house itself was described as dirty, with trash and clothes strewn everywhere, floors marked and stained. And amidst all this filth and chaos, a painful and cruel reminder of what could have been, of what was lost, hung on a wall, a framed photo or screenshot of his winning online lottery ticket. This symbol of his dream, his $22 million ticket to a new life, now silently and mockingly watched his life become a nightmare. It was a shocking picture of the gap between the promise of wealth and the devastating reality of its misuse when personal issues aren't dealt with. Friends who genuinely cared for him got more and more worried as they watched his rapid decline and deepening drug problem. They saw the paranoia, the emotional breakdown. One friend remembered begging him, a desperate warning, "You need to stop this, or you're going to die." But Joshua, caught in the powerful grip of addiction and maybe surrounded by his enabling new friends, didn't or couldn't listen to the warnings. He continued his downward spiral, seemingly unaware or resigned to the cliff edge he was rushing towards. This wasn't just a young guy spending his winnings irresponsibly. This was a full-blown dive into a dangerous and self-destructive lifestyle, paid for by a fortune that gave him endless access to the tools of his own destruction. The dream of a fresh start had soured into a grim reality where drugs controlled his days and nights, where real connection was replaced by parasitic relationships, and where the bright promise of $22 million was snuffed out by the darkness of addiction. The spiral was tightening, pulling him further and further away from any chance of recovery, towards an unavoidable and tragic end. The out-of-control, drug-fueled lifestyle Joshua Winslet was living was bound to get him noticed by the authorities. The party house in Newport, with its constant comings and goings and illegal substances, was a ticking time bomb. On August 30th, 2020, that bomb went off when police raided his home. It's believed the police acted on a tip that drugs might have been getting manufactured on the property. The raid revealed the harsh reality of Joshua's life. Officers found 2.27 grams of cocaine and nearly 30 grams of MDMA. But the discoveries didn't stop with illegal drugs. In a hidden spot in the bathroom, police found a Mauser handgun and ammunition. Having an illegal firearm added a dangerous new layer to his already spiraling situation. The consequences came quickly and hit hard. Joshua Winslet, the Powerball millionaire, was arrested and faced serious charges, supplying MDMA and illegally possessing an unlicensed firearm and ammunition. The dream had officially crossed over into a criminal nightmare. The young man who once had only $19 to his name now faced the possibility of prison, his millions offering no escape from the law. In September 2022, Joshua appeared in the Adelaide District Court. He pleaded guilty to supplying MDMA and possessing a firearm without a license. Admitting his guilt was a public confession of just how far he had fallen. The court case laid bare the tragic story of his decline. It was revealed how, even though his parents managed his winnings through a trust fund, he'd still been able to get enough money to quit his plumbing job and fund what was described as a hopeless drug addiction. He was painted as someone who had become a free ride for other drug users, losing his sense of purpose and community despite having so much money. During sentencing, Judge Heath Barclay gave a pretty blunt summary of Joshua's situation. The judge said that Winslet's lottery win, while incredibly positive in many ways, had a huge downside. You lost motivation in life and contented yourself with living a hedonistic lifestyle punctuated by drug use. The judge pointed out that because of the money, there was no motivation on your part to work or do anything other than enjoy yourself. His conviction, the judge said, had robbed him of the drive for a productive life and brought him into contact with the wrong crowd. The court heard that the firearm was found in a house where people were taking drugs and carrying on, highlighting the dangerous environment his wealth had created. The court was also told that the thought of jail had been a wake-up call for Winslet. He was ultimately sentenced to 3 years and 9 months in prison, with a non-parole period of 18 months. However, this sentence was suspended on a 2-year good behavior bond. This gave him a chance to show he had changed and could turn his life around. It was a lifeline, a chance from the court to escape the mess he was in. The legal battle was over, but it had taken a massive toll. The court case stripped away any leftover glamour from his lottery win, exposing the ugly reality of his life. The irony was heartbreaking. The $22 million that was supposed to buy him freedom had instead led him to the edge of prison, taking away his motivation and tangling him up in the criminal justice system. The price of his fortune was proving to be incredibly, tragically high. That suspended sentence in September 2022 was supposed to be a fresh start for Joshua Winslet, a chance to step back from the edge and get his life back. He was given a 2-year good behavior bond, a period to prove he could break free from the destructive habits that had taken over his recent years. For a little while, there might have been a tiny spark of hope, a possibility that the wake-up call from the courts would actually shock him onto a new path. But it seems the roots of his addiction and the pull of his party lifestyle were just too deep, the damage too severe. Despite the warnings from friends, despite the courts getting involved, Joshua apparently went back to his old ways. One friend remembered seeing him scraping away at a massive brick of cocaine, even after the court appearance, which shows the cycle of abuse hadn't been broken. That plea from another friend, "You need to stop this or you're going to die," echoed with a tragic accuracy. Tragically, Joshua didn't get the chance to finish his good behavior bond. In late 2022, just months after his sentencing, the worst fears of those who cared about him came true. Joshua Winslet died at his home. He was still a young man, his life cut devastatingly short. The official cause of death was reported as health complications from excessive drug use. The very substances his fortune had made so easy to get had, in the end, taken his life. His death, though maybe not a total shock to those who'd seen his steep decline, sent shockwaves through his circle of friends and family. They were described as devastated. The young man who had won $22 million, who had the world at his feet, died not in luxury surrounded by loved ones, but at home, a victim of his addictions. It's a stark and lonely picture, fulfilling that grim idea of a lonely grave, despite the immense wealth he once had. News reports confirmed his passing, with the Daily Mail Australia breaking the story. His death hammered home the finality of his tragic spiral. There would be no recovery, no redemption story, just a premature end to a life that had briefly shone so brightly with promise, only for it to be a cruel illusion. The millions he won couldn't buy him health, happiness, or ultimately more time. Instead, they had accidentally fueled the very demons that led to his death. That framed lottery ticket, if it still hung on the wall of his rundown home, now stood as a monument to a dream that had ended in the most heartbreaking way possible. His lonely death was the final, somber chapter in a story that went from a fairy tale win to a grim cautionary tale. Joshua Winslet's journey from a $19 bank balance to a $22 million Powerball win, and then to a lonely drug-related death, is more than just a shocking headline. It's a deeply unsettling story that peels back the shiny wrapper of lottery jackpots to show the potential for a lottery curse. It's a shocking truth about the complicated, and often destructive, mix of sudden wealth, personal demons, and how our minds work. The heart of this tragedy isn't just the money itself, but what the money made worse. Joshua wasn't a blank canvas when he won. He was already carrying some heavy baggage. His childhood was shaped by rare health conditions, Duane syndrome and Goldenhar syndrome, which led to physical differences, heart issues, and that single kidney. These conditions made him a target for severe bullying, forcing him to leave school early and deeply affecting his self-esteem and how he related to people. He was already isolated and made fun of long before he became a millionaire. This background likely created a deep need for acceptance and escape, a vulnerability that a huge, unearned fortune could easily prey on. The $22 million didn't fix these underlying problems. In many ways, it made them worse. The fresh start he hoped for was quickly swamped by people looking to take advantage. The friends his money attracted weren't the real connections he might have been longing for. They were enablers who helped him slide into a hopeless drug addiction. He became a free ride, his generosity taken for granted, his sense of purpose worn away. The judge's comment that he lost motivation in life and contented yourself with living a hedonistic lifestyle punctuated by drug use really hits home. The structure and simple ambition of his plumbing career were replaced by a void, which drugs and shallow relationships quickly filled. A really important part of this shocking truth is the serious lack of proper support for young, vulnerable lottery winners. While his parents initially managed the winnings through a trust, it just wasn't enough to protect him from the psychological shock of his new life or his own destructive urges. Sudden wealth can be incredibly isolating. It can create a huge gap between the winner and their old life and make them suspicious of new people. For someone like Joshua, already scarred by being an outsider, trying to navigate this new world without strong mental health support and unbiased financial advice was an almost impossible task. His story screams for better, more structured support for lottery winners, especially those who are young or come from tough backgrounds. The illusion of happiness that wealth projects is another dark part of this story. The mansions, being able to buy anything, the constant parties, these are often mistaken for real well-being. For Joshua, these were just the decorations of a life that was, on the inside, falling apart. His home became a drug den, a physical sign of his inner turmoil. That framed lottery ticket hanging amidst the mess is a haunting symbol of this gap between outward fortune and inner despair. And then there's the lottery curse idea, which often includes the sudden removal of any need to work or strive for something. For many, purpose is found in work, in overcoming challenges, in building something. When all your financial needs are met instantly, especially for someone young who hasn't yet figured out who they are or what their long-term goals are, it can lead to a kind of aimless drifting. Joshua, robbed of his motivation to work, found himself lost in a sea of too much money and too few reasons to do anything productive with his life. The ease with which he could fund his addiction was, of course, a major reason for his downfall. Money removed the financial hurdles that might, for others, limit how bad their substance abuse gets. For Joshua, the access was pretty much unlimited, allowing his addiction to spiral out of control until it claimed his life. His story is a tragic but powerful example that money, by itself, guarantees nothing. It can't buy real connection, it can't heal deep-seated trauma, and it can't create purpose where there isn't any. Without a strong personal foundation, solid support networks, and a clear sense of self, sudden immense wealth can become an incredibly destructive force, a trigger for a tragic spiral rather than a dream come true. The shocking truth of Joshua Winslet's life is that his $22 million windfall, the very thing that should have been his salvation, became the instrument of his lonely, premature end. Joshua Winslet's story echoes far beyond the quick headlines of a lottery when gone bad. It lingers as a somber, cautionary tale, a stark warning whispered from Australia to New Zealand and now, even further. His journey from a young plumber with just $19 in his pocket to a $22 million Powerball winner, and finally to a lonely death fueled by addiction, is a devastating story for our times. It makes us face uncomfortable truths about what fortune really is, about vulnerability, and about how society often isn't set up to handle the human fallout of sudden, unearned wealth. The devastation felt by his friends and family, even if it was mixed with a sad sense of inevitability given his decline, speaks to the personal tragedy behind the public story. He wasn't just a statistic or a cautionary tale. He was a young man with a difficult past who was handed an extraordinary chance, one that in the end just overwhelmed him. Authorities and support workers in Australia and New Zealand are still using his story to highlight how crucial it is to have comprehensive guidance, mental health support, and financial supervision for lottery winners, especially those who are young or vulnerable. His case has become a powerful example of why such support isn't a luxury, but an absolute necessity. Joshua's life and his lonely death are a powerful and heartbreaking reminder that true wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in purpose, connection, and well-being. The millions he won stripped him of his motivation, surrounded him with people who used him, and paid for his demise. The dream of a better life, bought with a lottery ticket, dissolved into a nightmare because the money, for all its power, couldn't fix his internal struggles or shield him from the dangers of his new world. The shocking truth of Joshua Winslet's story isn't just that a lottery win can end in tragedy, but that the dream of instant, effortless fortune can be a dangerous illusion if it's not grounded by a strong sense of self and a supportive, genuine community. His life makes us look beyond the jackpot, to question what real prosperity means, and to recognize that sometimes the greatest riches aren't those that can be won, but those that are built, piece by piece, through human connection, resilience, and a life lived with purpose. Joshua Winslet won the lottery, but in the end, he lost everything, leaving behind a chilling testament to the destructive power of fortune when it lands in the unprepared hands of a vulnerable soul. Joshua Winslet's story is a deeply human tragedy, a stark reminder of how quickly dreams can fall apart when unexpected pressures and unaddressed problems collide. These stories, though heartbreaking, teach us vital lessons about wealth, mental health, and the search for meaning. If you find value in exploring these complex stories and believe these cautionary tales need to be heard, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the human stories behind the headlines. What do you think could have made a difference for Joshua? Was it more support, earlier help, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts and insights in the comments below. Your views are important as we all try to understand these challenging situations.